Okay, I don't want to hold everyone's morning up, so we'll just get started. People will join us as they can. So for starters, introductions. My name is John Gestel. I'm our client relations coordinator here at Royalty Exchange. Likely spoken to many, if not all of you. And if you're interacting with Royalty Exchange for any investor related issue, normally you're talking to me. Next is Dayton O'Connor. Dayton is our lead analyst here. So he handles a lot of the valuations and things like that. And then we have Rob Bernhard, who is our corporate counsel. So any legal questions, stuff like that, Rob handles that, contracts, things like that. So for this discussion today, we're going to be talking about the most recent updates from the Mechanical Licensing Collective and what's been happening with the Copyright Royalty Board streaming mechanical royalty rate increase, the catch-up payments that are being made, and the payouts that are happening as we speak. So just a quick recap of what happened. So in 2022, the Copyright Royalty Board, or the CRB, they confirmed a retroactive increase to streaming mechanical royalty rate. So what the CRB does is every 5 years, they re-examine the royalty rate that's been paid out for mechanical royalties. And this is so that they keep up with the improving technological landscape and music consumption landscape. So with the advent of streaming and its popularity, that's required them to update that to make sure that artists are taken care of. So previously, the streaming mechanical royalty rate was set for 10.5% of streaming revenue. Now, what the CRB basically determined was that that rate needed to be increased for periods 2018 through 2022. As you can see in the headline rate percent of revenue increase, this is how it was rolled out. Now, since those historical royalties were paid out at the 10.5% level, that means there will be retroactive catch-up payments of these various increasing percentages year over for the previous year's plays. So part of this included the creation of the MLC, which started taking over mechanical royalty collections in 2021. So when you're looking at data for publishing assets, you'll see that things might shift in 2021 based on where they're coming from because of that. And it's also contributed to how these catch-up payments are structured, which we'll get into in a minute here. So since a lot of DSPs, digital service providers, companies like Spotify, things like that, were paying out at that 10.5% interim rate during these years, that means they have catch-up payments that they'll need to make, which then go to rights holders for those various periods. So as of April, I think it was 15th, the MLC provided their most recent update, which is that they've started processing and receiving statements and payments from the DSPs. They said that they've received 14 of the 21 DSPs reports. And so they're starting to churn through that stuff. The first distribution is set in April. The MLC pays monthly. So their first is in April. And it consisted of Apple Music, SoundCloud, Hoopla, Pacemaker, and Resizio, which are all digital distributors of various sizes. They're specifically looking at usages from 2018, 2019, and 2020. And they are covering specifically previously unpaid uses. Okay, so what that means is that there are instances where instead of paying at the interim 10.5% rate, these companies just withheld royalties altogether. So that's what this first payment is consisting of, the payments that were not made by these DSPs at all. And then in May, they'll be covering the previously partially paid uses, which is indicative of the 10.5% payouts that you would see in data, stuff like that. So that's how they've basically outlined they're going to be structuring it. They'll be looking at a set group of DSPs for a set period, in this case, 2018, 19, 20. And then 1 month will be the unpaid uses, and 1 month will be the partially paid uses. And so they'll keep doing that month over month until they're done. The expectation is that that goes through 2025. Now, this is an exciting update because we can actually model out what these catch-ups are going to look like. We know what this rate increase is going to be. We know what the payments were for the prior periods. We know which companies are paying out, and we know the rights types and everything that's relevant for the payments. So if we were to take one of our US-based earning publishing assets, we can distill down that data to just the applicable companies for the applicable years and retroactively apply those catch-ups that we know about to see what kinds of earnings we can expect from these catch-up payments, which will get paid out this year. So in this instance, it's just a catalog on Royalty Exchange. As you can see, we've broken it down to Apple, SoundCloud, Hoopla. Those are the only three that were listed in this, which implies the others had only previously unpaid uses, and these had previously paid uses. But we get, a nice little spreadsheet of year-over-year earnings for this. You have to remember, if you're doing this for your own exercises, you have to remember that it's only U.S. domestic streaming mechanical where this applies. And only these companies, which normally there's going to be a lot of different licensors that you have to sort through. So only these. And then, yeah, just for these pay periods as well. So gives us a nice picture. Now, when we retroactively apply the increase, we get something that looks like this. As you can see, it's kind of a gradual increase year over year because there's a slow percentage growth year over year for the retroactive increase. Pretty simple calculation. It gives us a nice baseline of what to expect. As you can see, it's not insignificant. This second half 2022 payment is almost $100. And that's only for what we know about, right? So that's only the previously partially paid uses. Doesn't include the unpaid uses, which are unknown at this point. I guess we'll see them in the next payment. Another important thing to consider is that there is interest that is accrued for these payments. We don't know what shape that's going to take, how that's paying out, or what that's going to look like, but there's more than just this increase to take into account. But it's exciting, knowing that there's upside coming for any royalty assets you're investing in. That's awesome. Now you can do this similar exercise with pretty much any publishing asset. So I would encourage you to do that, just so you have, kind of a better understanding of what to expect moving forward, and then assume upside, which is great. Now, another thing to consider here is that since most publishers pay out either quarterly or on the half year, you'll likely have a larger payment than just what we modeled in this previous year. This is just for 1 month period, according to the MLC's catch-up payments. Since they'll be doing this on a monthly basis, you'll likely get multiple different payors catch-up payments from multiple different partially paid and unpaid uses. So nice to see, but expect the payments to be larger. A bunch of stuff has already been processed and paid out, like we mentioned, just from those companies. But yeah, it's gonna keep growing. Now, on a look forward basis, as you saw from the initial chart, this caps at 15.1%. Part of this whole agreement was the DSPs, all the stakeholders, the NMPA. They agreed to a move forward rate for the 2023 to 2027 periods, which is 15.35%, which we reference here. So they've already looked forward to the next rate increase, and it's set for that. So there likely won't be increases like this for the next 5 years at least. But who knows what can happen? I mean, things can always change. They may re-examine it. Spotify is trying to do some crazy workaround stuff with their licensing categorization to try and avoid this. So we'll see how that all changes. But again, helpful exercise in modeling out the increases and, making that into any kind of valuation we're making for a publishing asset, especially on Royalty Exchange, where we give you all that data so you can do that yourself. So that's the long and short of it. We'll be keeping an eye on it. Hopefully they'll give us a little bit more clue into what the interest will be I know that there was also a February 9th deadline for a lot of these companies to provide this data, and I don't believe they've all provided it. So there will probably be late penalties on top of this. But again, these are all things that we don't really know what shape they're going to take yet. But we'll keep an eye on it. It'll likely be subject for future office hours and things like that. And that's pretty much it. That's really what the update is. Exciting to see movement, exciting to see payments coming, and also exciting to kind of get some granularity into what the payments are going to be. So again, if you're considering a royalty asset, especially one that's publishing, take this information, apply it to whatever analysis you're doing. We can help with that if you're having trouble with it. So with that all covered, we'll get right into the submitted questions here, and then we'll get into your floor questions. So we'll start from the top here. There may be some duplicates in here. We'll get through them as we work through it here. So first question: how can I make a modest sum without getting fleeced? This is just a good intro for our blanket. We're not financial advisors. Investors need to make their own investment decisions. So do your own analysis, do your own due diligence. That's why we offer this, kind of help you have more tools in your belt for running an analysis. So that's really up to you. All investments inherently carry risk, so make sure that you're doing the work. Can royalty rights purchased be resold? Yes, they can. Anything you buy with us can be resold with us, and we generally automatically relist anything that's eligible. So, be aware of that. If you specifically don't want to relist, we can take it down for you, but we always recommend having the liquidity preset in case you need it. Next one here. Is this just for United States artists or worldwide? It is international, so don't feel like you're bound by where you live. We can always work something out. Next question here. Explain with details how the ROI is calculated when purchasing a specific royalty. Dayton, you want to give us a rundown on general ROI calculations for royalty assets? I think you're probably the best for that.
1 second while I was taking myself off of mute for that. Sure. So when we're considering the ROI, that's taking a look at the cash flows that are going to be forecasted over the period for the life of the asset and the estimated term for that pay down. And that's typically a 6-year term that we're contemplating for our fixed term, fixed repayment advance assets. For that specific calculation, it's just a simple annualized ROI that we anticipate that there's going to be a target for this asset that our investors are going to be keying in on when they're placing their bids.
Cool. Next question here. Can my company buy royalties on behalf of my publishing company? Yes, you can use a purchase entity if that's what your question is. So yes, you can do that. Rob, I don't believe there's any kind of legal issue with one company buying on behalf of another company or anything like that, right? It's kind of a weirdly phrased question, but
yeah, I guess I'd be kind of assuming the question, but you can purchase on behalf of a company. That's fine. That kind of dovetails in maybe if you're talking about publishing to this next question: how involved can an investor actually get in choosing how the assets are employed? So if you have a publishing company and you want to buy a royalty stream on royalty exchange, just remember that you're not actually going to get the copyrights. You're not going to get the right to license the compositions in the case of publishing or the masters in the case of sound recordings. It's a purely passive right. Those the copyrights and administration rights typically lie and will continue to lie with whoever the distributor of the asset is, so a major label typically or a publisher, whoever that's with. So you'll have the right to the income stream, but not the right to actually issue license for that content.
Next question here. What are the options to avoid getting harmed by inflation? Kind of a tricky question. My default response would be is that it's kind of baked into royalties, since especially with this, the revenue is derived from the revenue that streaming services charge based on their membership and listenership. So it kind of automatically adjusts to inflation. But beyond that, there's amortization strategies with claiming the income, and that's a good way too. Also kind of leads into the next question here is what are the tax implications? It's illegal for us to provide tax advice, but we do have a couple of snippets on the site about amortization and how to claim the income, doing a fixed decay curve, stuff like that. So there are tax advantages. I would definitely recommend talking to your tax advisor or whoever your tax person might be about it. And then look at our FAQ page because there's some specific information there about it. And then we also have a blog post about amortizing and building fixed decay curves, stuff like that. So take a look at that stuff. And that's really the best we can offer for that.
But I guess in the baseline, very generally, royalties are taxed as ordinary income. So you'll get a 1099 MISC for the actual royalty payments that come in while you own a royalty asset.
Yes. Thank you.
One thing I want to add just to the question right before the tax implication piece with respect to inflation harm. These assets are being generated by typically, if we're talking about a passive royalty income asset, it is a percentage of the revenue that is being collected or generated by the service on which the performance is occurring. So if we're talking about DSPs by way of example, Spotify gets their revenue they generate within a fiscal period. A percentage that gets divided out to various rights holders for the public performance and for the master side. That income gets allocated out and gets paid through as a royalty. So the inflation implication there is a lot of those businesses and services, one, are going to be changing up their practices in terms of their pricing and how their operations, so they themselves can manage any risks that come from inflation. And then that's also going to be passed through your passive income asset if they increase prices in the face of increasing inflation, for example. So, there's because you're collecting this passively from a lot of services that are also trying to counter inflation, there's not as much that you may think you need to do to insulate yourself from what's happening in the macro. And I also wanted to, I say what's happening in the macro to expand on the fact that we've touched on a lot of times in office hours and a lot of our investor materials, the fact that what is happening in the music space in terms of consumption, in terms of royalty generation, is oftentimes not correlated to what's happening in the broader economic landscape. So while there may be some stresses that certain businesses face because of rising inflation rates, that's not impacting, say, how much music someone is listening to on one of the DSPs, or how much they're willing to pay for their subscription for their music streaming service. So the fact that this asset is, naturally being insulated in a number of different ways from inflationary pressures.
Yep. This is one of the reasons why, we tout this stuff, right? It's an excellent hedge from traditional market fluctuations, uncorrelated in nature, all that good stuff. Next question here. How much can I start investing? I would like to know more about this new field. So this question kind of asks, what's the low end of purchase pricing? Normally it ends up being around $5,000 to $10,000 for a singular asset. All assets do need to be purchased in their entirety from a single buyer. So that's really what you should expect for requirements. But really the amount that you would need is going to be dependent on the asset that you want to buy. Just because you've got $5,000, if an asset's worth 50, that's obviously not going to work. So it's kind of up to you, but that's really the floor of what we see from pricing. How often do artists put up their catalogs to sell? Very often. We get something like between 5 and 15 listings live every week. Kind of depends on who we're working with at what point. But stuff goes up all the time. That's why we send out kind of a lot of emails about asset updates and new things coming. So if you're not opted into that stuff, we always recommend it. It's the best way to get clued into new opportunities, stuff like that. Can you explain the basic metrics to a new investor? Kind of a general question. if whoever submitted this is here, I'd say, hey, let's set up a call and talk through some of those stuff, and look at the guides that we have in our investor resources page. The biggest one that people always ask about that's really relevant for our site is dollar age. It's effectively a metric we use to help to determine the consistency of earnings over time based on the weighted age of the earnings and the tracks included. It's a bit more than that. So that's why I say let's schedule a call and talk about it. But that's a key one to look at. And then obviously understanding the sources, the different rights types, stuff, things like that, mechanical versus public performance versus sync versus, composition versus sound recording, all those various music industry lingo terms, you'll want to have an understanding of those. Dana, Rob, anything you guys want to add to that for basic terms? No, okay. Next here, how often do royalties get posted for sale? We just answered that one. What are the different types of royalties available on Royalty Exchange? How are the royalty prices determined? So we work with pretty much all forms of intellectual property. Music just is the most common. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have seen the Listerine royalties go up. Maybe the Cherry Garcia trademark usage. Last year we had royalties derived from the use of news articles in standardized testing. We've worked with the whole slew of it. YouTube royalties, which is effectively ad revenue, a whole bunch of stuff. How are prices determined? I mean, aside from our valuation metrics, which Dayton alluded to earlier, pricing is set by the asset owner, list pricing, stuff like that. Our marketplace median is part of our valuation model based on historical transactions that have occurred for similar assets on the site. So that's macro market data. But yeah, the list price responses to offers, that's all done by the seller. So it is a direct negotiation that you're doing. Anything you guys want to add to that for royalty asset types and stuff?
No, I guess if you're interested in specific types of music royalties within the music royalty area, there's some good articles on our site explaining the differences between all the different types, the two different music copyrights and the different royalty streams that are paid out based on the different types of licensing those copyrights generate.
Yeah, and all that stuff can be found on our blog page. If you just go to the investor resources section, investor guides, all that stuff, you'll find it all there. Next question here. If a remaining term is 5 years and earnings have been 5K per year, is paying more than 25K a bet that future earnings will go up? You could say it's a bet. It might be a little bit of a risky bet, but
yeah, I suppose it's a function of whoever that investor's expected return or desired target return is going to be. Who's asking that particular specific question?
Yeah, it's so the way that the limited term assets work is once the term ends, those rights just automatically revert back to the originating seller of the asset. So there's no like return of capital or anything like that, like you'd see with a bond. So if there's 5 years left and it earns 5K a year, you pay 25K, your ROI is going to be 0, assuming it stays at 5K a year.
Yeah.
Of course, it could go up. It's always a possibility. But you want to bake in some upside to your investment, and if it ends up increasing, then that's good for you. But
right, assuming that this investor wants to get a positive return on their investment, and has a certain target that they're anchoring towards, then they would need to calculate,
that's
what
greater
it's
than
going to pay out
0.
for 5 years. Yes, exactly. Yes, assuming that is what's happening here. But we can't tell you how to bid, obviously.
Right. Look, if that works for you, then great. We wouldn't recommend it necessarily. Okay, what due diligence measures should we take as investors to assess the stability and earnings projection of a specific royalty catalog? Great question. Kind of a difficult one to answer in this setting. So I'd say, hey, let's schedule a call. We can go through the earnings history of a specific asset, look at red flags, things we like, stuff like that. Key ones are going to be, where is the earnings coming from? Sources make a big difference in how music is consumed and what to expect moving forward. Things like radio are inherently short-lived. TikTok, short-lived, versus, you know, streaming and playlisting is normally a bit more consistent and has a bit more longevity. So you want to take things like that into account. The age of the catalog, where it is in its kind of earnings life cycle, also going to be super important. If a song's brand new and the biggest earner of a catalog, it's not really likely that it's going to stay at the earnings level that it's currently at if it's a new release. So all things like that are important to take into account. I would argue that what the key artists in the catalog are doing is important. Whether they're on tour, if they're active on social media with their fan base, you know, all that stuff's going to be relevant to, you know, are they going to be performing and engaging with their audience? Are they going through any legal battles or anything like that? That can impact royalties. So things like that, you know, just understanding the whole picture of the catalog you're looking at. Obviously the key earners, but then, you know, beyond that as well. Robert, Aiden, anything you guys want to add on to stuff like that?
The point that I touch on is a lot of the diligence can be accomplished using the information that we're going to be posting on a given listing for an asset. And so what you can do or what's going to be available to you may largely be a function of what's going to be reflected in that data. But the listing for given assets typically going to include the dollar age, which we always talk about is one of the key metrics for determining the the future likelihood of earning stability for a catalog over time. John checked out, doing your own reading outside of class in terms of figuring out what's going on with this particular artist in terms of if this is a younger artist, are they more established, less established, are they signed, are they independent, do they have a lot of, is like a TikTok virality thing, is this something organic? Making those kinds of judgment calls that would be something that you would be looking into that we would not be, contextualizing on our site necessarily, but where the money is coming from in the earnings listing. Yep. You can see that when you look at the charts on a listing. You can also see that when you go into the raw data for a given asset that appears. So is most of this money coming from radio? Is it coming from streaming services? Is it coming from AV over-the-top services? So is this production music asset? Is this something by a composer or a songwriter? All of those things you should be, or you have the opportunity to evaluate when you're looking at a given listing that appears on our site.
Yeah. And again, right, like let's look at a real life example, this whole rap feud between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, right? Bringing a lot of attention to both the artists, which is going to, have a ripple effect in their catalog as people go investigate them, listen to their back catalog, stuff like that. So real world
I
events
think for that
matter
specific
too.
example, John, like the top 10 I think on Billboard this week is like 3 or 4 Kendrick tracks, which is sort of incredible for an artist which is very established but had not been doing much in terms of like hot releases, probably in the past 3 to 5 years up to this point, and is now dominating the cultural landscape and listens.
So that's what we mean when we say like, keep a pulse on what the artists are doing, because it can matter. And this all kind of leads into this next question here. What kind of third-party tools there to understand the lifetime value of an asset? Now, I don't know about for understanding the lifetime value of an asset, but there are third-party tools you can use for understanding how something's been streamed, for example. So the one that I always mention is Chartmetric. They do a good job. It is a paid service, but they do a good job. There may be others out there. Rob, Dayton, I don't know if you guys have any that you'd like to use or anything like that, but.
Well, I guess, Chartmetric has a lot of playlisting information that I guess probably you could probably glean from Spotify or looking at the streaming services, but it's all kind of organized in a nice place, and does a pretty good job that way. Not as far as like evaluating assets, but the MLC, like we already talked about, is a public database showing all the registered musical composition copyrights and which sound recordings that they're tied to. You can go onto their platform and search for an artist. You can search for a songwriter, a song title, and kind of see who the participants are, who the different publishers are. kind of goes along with what the PROs, ASCAP PMI have as far as their online repertory. So those kind of things are publicly available, at least to get information on a songwriter or publisher's catalog. Those are somewhat helpful.
Yep, definitely. And then one other that I would be remiss if I didn't mention is this isn't exactly like due diligence or anything like that. But Song Trust actually has a great glossary of music industry terms. So if you see something that you don't know the term for it or what it means, their glossary is pretty good. You can just Google it and pull it up, but that's pretty comprehensive too. Okay, moving on here. What is the way to evaluate the performance of a portfolio, and are there any learnings about potential step changes in earnings? We've kind of talked about that already. Again, best recommendation is if you want to look at something specifically, reach out to us. We'll set up a call. Next, how are rights transferred if I purchase them? How do I receive payments? What fees are there? Rob, you want to take on the transfer process and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you win an asset on the marketplace, what will go out to you is an invoice days to send the funds for your purchase. There'll also be a purchase agreement that's between you as the investor and the seller of the asset. Part of our terms of use is that Royalty Exchange is the administrator of any asset that's purchased on the platform. So what happens is once you send in the funds, we confirm that the purchase agreements are signed. There's typically a transfer document, like letter of direction or a change of payee form that whoever is the ultimate payor of the royalties requires. The seller then directs their distributor to pay Royalty Exchange on the investor's behalf. The investor is the owner of the asset, but Royalty Exchange just administers the payment. So once the LOD or assignment form is submitted, we hold the investor's funds until the distributor actually confirms to us that the assignment is in place. We also hold 10% of the seller's proceeds of the sale until Royalty Exchange actually receives the next payments. Distributors have different payment schedules, monthly, quarterly, biannual, all over the place. And a lot of times our sale may happen right before their distribution goes out and they don't have a chance to update. So the way we kind of protect the investor is to make sure that we have a pool of funds that once that payment's made, if it is in fact made to the seller, then we can do a debit credit, make sure the investor receives that very next payment after the sale, because that's part of the purchase agreement is that investors are entitled to all payments after the date of the sale, regardless of when they were earned. So we kind of have those processes in place to make sure the investors get paid. And then once that happens, then the seller gets their funds released, and then investors will be receiving those royalties from Royalty Exchange going forward.
Other stuff to mention in that, fees. The buyer's fee is a set fee. It's either gonna be $500 or 1% of the final sale price, whichever is higher between those two figures will be the buyer's fee. And that's just a one-time fee and the only fee you pay. There's no admin fee or anything like that. So that's really it. And we waive that for all access members. It's part of our paid membership. So if you're making a lot of purchases in a year or planning to buy something that's a little bit more expensive, normally it's something that I would recommend. If you're interested in it, let me know. Let's talk through what you're trying to do to see if it's really worthwhile for you, because it is a little bit of an expensive membership to get, but it can have a lot of savings if you're active. So I always recommend, hey, let's have a conversation about it, make sure it's right for you before moving forward. Anything else to mention there? No, I think that covers it. Okay, when computing the median prices, are those based on the dollar age, genre, term length, or other variables? Yes, and yes, except genre. I don't believe genre gets taken into account there. Dayton, can you confirm that for us?
Yeah, genre is not factored into the median prices for assets.
Is there anything else that is considered that we should, I guess depending on the profile of the catalog, we may look at the 3-year average rather than the last 12 months earnings. I believe we'd look at whichever one is lower when calculating the median. So there's that to consider. So it's always going to be a
If there's
slanted
a 3-year average
conservative.
available, yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it'll be slanted conservatively, which is helpful. Yeah, but dollar age, term length, those are kind of the key ones, I would say. Next question here is a good one. You tested a new feature that offered buyers the opportunity to bid for partial ownership of an asset. Was this discontinued? Kind of, but not really. It was something we were experimenting with a few months ago. If I recall correctly, it was a pretty unique asset that we were doing that on, so that was kind of why we did it. But we haven't really revisited that since we did that one time. So just because of that, I'd say it's kind of discontinued because it was something we were just experimenting with, and we haven't seen an opportunity to include it again yet. Not to say that it couldn't happen. So I'd say stay tuned. We'll see. We're always experimenting with new ways and features and tools for investors to kind of get opportunities. So we'll see. We'll see is the ultimate answer for that one. Next one here. What is the current status of the US CEO directive to the MLC to pay mechanicals to the terminating publisher? To the terminating publisher? I'm not sure what that is in reference to. I'm hoping that we covered that in the MLC update that we just went through. Dave and Rob, you guys see something I don't hear?
Oh, is this like a sort of
No,
a pre-term, post-term question potentially? Like if a publisher was collecting over a term period that would be covered by the retroactive payments, who would be entitled to collect those royalties if those retroactive payments are paid out post-term?
I don't know. I think we covered that if that's what it is. I think we answered your question in the presentation. If
Yeah.
not, shoot us a note, and maybe we can elaborate on this question a little bit more. Next one here. Do you allow foreign investors? Yes, we do. Is there an increasing interest from retail investors in music royalties, or are there more institutional investors? Great question. I would say there's increasing interest in both, honestly. Partly because of what's been going on with hypnosis, partly because of what we've been doing here at Royalty Exchange and other companies trying to offer these assets, and just kind of the lifting stigma on selling your catalog. It's brought a lot of people to the space. I mean, just like over the weekend, Financial Times wrote something about us, just saying like, hey, like this is still great way to add to your portfolio. So yeah, the answer is yes to both. There's a lot of increase from both. In short, I wouldn't say there's necessarily more of one than the other. I guess technically there's gonna be more retail investors and institutions just from a numbers game, but yeah, increasing interest from both. Please discuss most prevalent offering terms completed through 2024 year to date. Most prevalent offering terms, I would say life of rights is the most prevalent. I don't know, what do you guys think?
yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I guess if we want to go back for new folks, so there are a couple different options that sellers have when they place an asset available for purchase on the marketplace. They can be a fixed return asset, meaning the investor will collect up to a certain point. There'll be a 10-year time limited assignment, a 30-year time limited assignment. And what John mentioned, life of rights, was typically would be the life of copyright for a music asset, or if it's a different term for another type of royalty, then it would be for the lifetime that those rights exist. And I think historically, life of rights has been the most prevalent. I think there's kind of offerings in each bucket, pretty much open all the time on Royalty Exchange. I just don't have the numbers in front of me on what the most prevalent is, at least this year.
Yeah, I believe, Dayton, based on our all access insights pieces this year, that life of rights has been the most, I think.
I feel like life of rights is overwhelmingly the most prevalent. of
Okay.
the types of assets that we see transacted and sold on the exchange.
Yeah, I think it's the most too. They command the highest prices, and normally that's what's most important to the seller, is getting the best price, which is really why. Okay, next one here. Can the buyer dashboard include the same type of detail that a listing has and updated? I don't see why not, aside from spacing constraints or something like that. Happy to talk to our tech team. If you've got something specific in mind that you want to see, let us know. I mean, we love feedback like that. Any ways to improve the experience and the tools for investors, we want to hear about it. We want to hear your ideas. So shoot us a note at investors@royaltyexchange.com or call me and let's talk about it. Right now, it's mostly geared towards making sure you can get your earnings statements there for any distributions you receive, and you have kind of a snapshot of your ROI based on the income collected, price you paid, things like that. And then you can always link to the listing itself, so you can kind of see there. But I don't see a reason why we couldn't, make that dashboard more robust. So yeah, let us know what you're thinking. Do I own the royalty? You own the right to the royalty revenue. That's what you are specifically buying on Royalty Exchange, as opposed to copyrights, ownership control, stuff like that, which Rob talked about a bit earlier. How can one be sure they're receiving the money that is owed? So that's what we're doing as the administrator, making sure that everything's paid out correctly, making sure all the statements are accurate, stuff like that. We do catch stuff from time to time that's inaccurate. Some of you may have gotten a note at some point, like from us, we're like, hey, this was wrong. We're working with the payer to fix it. Ultimately, there are a number of royalty collection agencies that do not offer audit rights to their members. So there is a degree of it is what it is, just based on the company that's paying out. But if you think that something looks funny or weird, reach out to us. We are happy to go approach, whoever is collecting and paying out the royalties and saying, hey, this doesn't look right. Can you take a look and see what's going on here? We have had to do that before, and we will have to do it again. So if you see something you're concerned about, let us know. We can help you troubleshoot. We can get to the bottom of it, see what's going on. So yeah, let us know. Robert, Dayton, anything you guys want to add to that? Okay, cool. How are royalties paid? So we pay to whichever account you specify in our admin portal. It's called Payment Hub. So you specify your banking info there, and we just pay out there. The frequency depends on the collection company, as we'll basically pay out as we receive royalties. So if they pay quarterly, we'll pay you quarterly. If they pay monthly, we'll pay you monthly. Really depends on the asset and where that's coming from. Is there a financial or payment plan to purchase royalties? Unfortunately, no. We do not offer any kind of financing for these. Investors are responsible for financing and funding their own purchases. So yeah, no. If you own a song, but they make an updated song with the same title, do I still get the royalty like the Kane song currently? So this is a question of what rights you are buying, and also what shape the updated song takes. So let's take, for example, Taylor Swift, right? There is the big scandal about her re-recording all of her catalog and then re-releasing it, right? Now, when you create a song, there are two main rights types that branch down into the various royalties that get paid out. There's the sound recording, and then there's the musical composition. So the musical composition royalty tree is derived from the music and the lyrics as it's written on the paper, okay? And the sound recording, that whole branch is specifically the specific recording that people are listening to. Now, when Taylor Swift rewrote all her songs, what she did is she created a new sound recording royalty for all of her catalog compared to the musical composition, which stays the same because it's the same songs. So if you own the musical composition and someone does a cover of a song that you own, you should be getting paid for the use of that musical composition. Now, if you own the sound recording and someone did a cover, you would not get paid for the new recording of that same song, even though you have rights to a song. because it's the specific recording that you're collecting on. So all that to say, it depends on the rights you get, and it depends on how it's updated and what shape that whole new song takes. Robert, Dayton, anything you guys want to add to that explanation about kind of how that all works?
I think that's pretty good for our purposes here. You can get super into the weeds on the different nuances on what's considered a derivative or a new copyright, but I think that's probably outside the scope of what we're doing. There's definitely information on that on our website on the different types and what you can expect to get paid for on the different copyrights in the blogs.
Next one here. What methodology will be used to verify the adjustments are based on the correct consumption data? That's everything that the MLC is doing. So that's kind of what we're trying to update here and keep you all in the loop about, is what we get from the MLC and what that all means for royalty investing. Hopefully they will release their methodology once the payments officially come out. I haven't seen any of the hard payments yet. But hopefully we'll get some purview into that. They give pretty regular updates, so I'm hoping we get one in May. But yeah, so we'll see. We'll let you know when we can.
If we're talking about, quote unquote correct consumption data, as the MLC has mentioned in their releases regarding how they're going to be paying this stuff out, the data is being provided directly by the DSPs. So it's a function of the information that they get from the music users that they're going to be using to process the payments for the retroactive periods. So one would assume that, unless there is some auditing the MLC is doing against that data themselves to verify that what Spotify or Apple Music provides to them is correct, that because it's coming directly from the horse's mouth, that it's true.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So again, we'll let you know. Hopefully they'll provide a good explanation to the methodology and all that, but we'll see. Next one here. Is there any update on when the April ASCAP quarterly payments will be released? I believe they're already paid out. Yeah, I believe I'll check with admin, but I believe they've been paid. Next question here. The time frame till royalty will be paid out through Payment Hub takes a lot of time in some cases. Are there improvements to come? Yes, there are. We are going to be working with a new payment processor pretty soon. I've got a meeting tomorrow with them, kind of getting that all set up. Short answer, yes. Can't share too much yet because it's not really set up, but it's going to hopefully help a lot. So stay tuned. We will update you all as things get updated. But yeah, there's some good work on the horizon. So I'm excited for that.
And so our administration agreement on the terms of use requires to pay out within 30 days of us receiving a payment from the distributor. I think we're averaging somewhere between 8 and 10 days at the moment. Kind of depends on the payor and the period. But that's kind of the landscape now. And then, like John said, we're always working to cut that time period down.
Yep. Yeah, super excited about the stuff we got in the works this year. So hopefully it'll be as impactful as I hope. Do you anticipate any long-term impact of royalty investing because of the recent mandate by the CRB? I don't know. I mean, I think what will happen is that multiples paid will stay the same, honestly. That's what I think will happen. Maybe increasing a little bit just as more people get involved, but I think it won't change too much. I don't know. What do you guys think? Any thoughts?
I'd like to guess how investors are going to value these different things, but it certainly seems like the MLC has been a positive, is particularly for the publishers and songwriters. Those organizations are working to increase their size of the pie. So I would think, if I was investing in these things, that I would view those as a good thing. Yeah, anything for me would be a guess.
Yeah, kind of to Rob's point, it's sort of difficult forecasting these things. I think a lot has been made about the CRB with respect to royalty investing by people that are already in the space who have educated themselves about how that can potentially impact their future income streams. So, the people who are already in the know are in the know. Will this draw more visibility to potential investors and sellers that want to get into this space? I mean, perhaps, but as John has touched on earlier in this call, a lot has been made about the really big catalogs and transactions that have happened here in the past, and that's probably been the main driver of interest in people deciding to check out the value of royalty investing. I would imagine for the investors on our platform and investors who are purchasing these kinds of assets, they're looking at the kind of stability of future payouts, the predictability of future payouts. If the pie is growing, that's good. There's more visibility that's being given to a certain portion of the royalties that are being paid out to some rights holders on like the composition public performance side. So that's definitely a positive, but I don't know, how much the CRB's contributions alone are going to be driving, long-term royalty investing interest. Probably it's a net positive in that the overall pie is growing and the shares to certain content creators that weren't getting paid out, equitably in some view in the past has been addressed and hopefully will be improved going forward. So hopefully I can't imagine there being sort of a net negative as what the CRB is doing, I guess.
I feel the same way, right? I can't imagine. So yeah, don't need to answer that anymore. Next question here. Is there any way to determine what the catch-up amounts are or will be? Yeah, that's what we modeled here. That was what this is. Now again, this is just based on the available data for partially paid uses for the periods for the DSPs that are paying out. There's a lot more than this. There's the unpaid uses. There's the other DSPs, so there's a lot more to come. But like, yeah, you can take the data from this percentage based on what was paid out here, build the increase so you can see what's coming based on everything. So yeah, you totally can. Last question here. Can I place my royalty earnings in a trust? Yes, you can. Yes, you absolutely can. In fact, lots of investors do that already. It's a great way to do legacy holdings for, family, stuff like that. Just give us the trust info when you buy your royalty asset and we can paper everything for the trust. So it's super simple. Just give us the info, what you need, and we'll get it taken care of. Okay, so that covers all our submitted questions. I know we've gotten a number of Q&A questions here. So we'll get through these one after the next. Okay, first one. How is the risk managed if streaming platforms change their business models or licensing policies, which could affect future royalties? So that's kind of what Spotify is trying to do right now based on the CRB rulings and stuff like that. And there's a lot of pushback from all the stakeholders, publishers, the NMPA, everyone that was involved in the rate increases. So they can try, but there's going to be a big fight for them to do it. There's a lot of people are speaking up for the artists to make sure that they are, compensated appropriately, which, trickles down to you all as royalty investors. So that risk is all managed from these oversight bodies like the CRB, basically. Robert, Dade, anything you guys want to add to that?
The thing I'll touch on is there's always going to be a tension with any of these services that make extensive use of music in terms of managing the costs that are associated with the percentage of the revenue that's going to be going out the door to pay the royalty. Now, in the US, obviously, there's, there are a lot of different remedies for rights holders to make sure that their rights are being fairly enforced in this marketplace and that they're getting their fair payment. But I think this is just kind of evidence of how this is going to look going forward, where you're going to see these tensions between the DSPs that are profit-driven organizations that are trying to minimize their costs and maximize their profits versus the rights holders who are advocating that they're being fairly compensated for the content that empowers these services to exist in the first place. I'm not, how could that affect future royalties? It's impossible to say. But I think that this is always going to be an element, and has been in the royalty, music business. We're just seeing it in a different way now with these really big market players that have a lot of power, like Spotify.
Yeah. Rob, anything you want to add?
No, I just think of if I guess it's tough to assess the risk just like in the way that the marketplace is right now. But if you think even within our very recent lifetimes, the completely monetization model was completely different throughout the whole music industry, right? Like things can change. Like maybe streaming isn't where all the money comes from, in 10 or 15 years. Maybe there's brand new media, like it could come from anywhere. So
that's true.
I think it depends on how long of a view you're taking here.
Yeah. And ultimately that's what the CRB is for, right? Like we mentioned, every 5 years they re-examine stuff to make sure that the payouts for royalties are keeping up with technology. Sorry, Dana, I don't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, no. I think that's a great point, John. I mean, if you're an investor and this is something that really concerns you, maybe as part of your due diligence, you want to do some research into where the money is being generated for a royalty asset that you're considering investing in, but also how that money is being generated and being paid through. So we talked about if you're looking at a public performance royalty, that's ASCAP, by way of example, one of the PROs that has negotiated with the music user for a rate based on what's being represented in their repertories. But the PROs have certain, legal requirements about how they can negotiate, which can affect, the rates that they can get by way of their negotiations compared to one of the major labels or one of the larger established publishers that has a lot more leverage in terms of how they can negotiate with these free market players and how they can have their catalogs appear on these services that would likely allow them to benefit from a larger percentage of their revenue coming from the DSPs as being paid through a royalty. That's one thing you may want to consider. You may want to consider how that royalty is being paid out in terms of the rate that's being used. So a historic example, mechanical royalties, they were, paid out on like a fixed, 9.1 cents per every copy of like a CD sold or something. And because those rates are fixed, those are not going anywhere. So it's going to be something that's super safe to invest in because you always know what you're getting paid out for. But there are, potential downsides too, because you wouldn't expect that rate to be negotiated on like a free market, more regular basis. Just some food for thought.
And then part 2 here, what due diligence measures should we take as investors to assess the stability and earnings projection of a specific royalty catalog? We kind of answered that and talking about, how we look at this stuff and things to consider. If you want to have a larger conversation, Alvaro, let me know. We can set up a call for it. And then part 3 of your question here, are periodic audits conducted on song revenues to ensure transparency and accuracy in royalty payments? Yeah, we do that with every distribution. There's a fresh audit on the earnings to make sure that stuff's accurate. We're constantly looking back at it to make sure. So that's happens regularly from us. But that being said, we always encourage investors look at it yourself too. If something looks weird to you, let us know. We're happy to take another look. But our team is actively auditing this stuff as it comes in. So it's part of our admin service. Next one here. Is there a risk to buy a catalog which is AI generated and end up in cutting payments because it was AI generated? Yeah, definitely. You may be aware of Spotify changing its qualifications of a listen for a song based on the length of it. So like a lot of AI catalogs, like, oh, here's 10,000 1-minute songs. So Spotify's response is, okay, like if you listen to a song for more than a minute, then it generates the royalty or a stronger royalty, or I can't remember the specifics of it. So yeah, there's definitely risk with that.
Yeah, I think that was like a royalty eligibility thing, and that was like for functional music. I think the cutoff was like 2 minutes. But that's exactly the kind of stuff that could be, cranked out pretty quickly by AI related content, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's probably some ownership questions that would come into play if that could potentially impact that in the future if a lot of AI stuff is generating a lot of significant plays and royalty streams, like who owns the AI song, who has the rights to it. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of speculation about what that's going to do.
Right.
I would expect right now that stuff that's being generated by AI is probably not generating too much like economic value, especially if we're talking about like the functional music that's really like popped up big on Spotify, that sort of generic sounds. So I think this is really sort of a speculative thing about what the future would hold for that.
Yeah. Yeah, we had one AI catalog go up and we pulled it down. It's just too much risk with it. Next question here. When I buy rights on the platform, do I own the rights myself, or is Royalty Exchange the owner as an intermediary? Can I hold and sell them on my own, or do I need to use the Royalty Exchange? I'm asking because I want to set up a company that owns several catalogs. When you purchase on Royalty Exchange, the purchase agreement is a direct contract between you and the seller. Royalty Exchange is actually not a party to that contract at all. So your purchase is a direct purchase. I do want to reiterate that it's just the royalty rights that you are purchasing, not the copyrights or anything like that. But it is a direct transaction between you and the seller. So yes, you own those royalty rights yourself. You can hold and sell them on your own. You don't need to use Royalty Exchange if you don't want to. Obviously, we would recommend it. Our service is the best marketplace for buying and selling this stuff. So you probably be best served selling with us, but you don't have to. The one thing that you would need to do is if you did sell it off the platform, you'd have to let us know because we were running the administration on it. So, we need to know where to send the money. So that's what you would need to consider.
Yeah,
Rob, I
that's
see
the
your,
caveat I was
yeah.
going to say, John. Yeah. So if you buy it, you are the owner. Royalty Exchange is the administrator. So it's got to stay in the Royalty Exchange ecosystem for the payments, but you can sell it off marketplace if you wanted to.
Okay, that covers that. How did due diligence royalty exchanges doing work, and what if something is not good with the asset after purchase? Rob, you want to talk about our due diligence practices?
Yeah. So whenever a seller comes to us with a royalty asset to sell, kind of what we say we do is we confirm that they are who they say they are. We do a check on their personal information. We determine that they own what they say they own, meaning we get the contracts that were used to establish their ownership in that asset. We connect directly with their investor, or I'm sorry, with their distributor to confirm that they own what they say they own, meaning they have the rights to these royalty payments. And then we also check that they have the ability to sign it. So part of that asset check that we do on a seller includes a lien check, any sort of encumbrance that might affect the royalty stream going forward. So we'll do a check on that and require that if there's any outstanding issues like a IRS lien or something like that will need to be satisfied. Sometimes there'll be an active advance with their distributor that would need to be paid off through closing. And then we ask the distributor, is there any sort of claim or issue on the account that will need to be addressed as well. So those are kind of the three things we do. We confirm who they are, who they say they are, they own what they say they own, and that they have the ability to assign it freely. And then if something happens after the purchase that is contrary to that, the seller is making representations in their purchase agreement with the investor basically confirming all of those things and more. And if it turns out we find an issue after the fact, we work with the distributor and the seller to try to resolve that on the investor's behalf.
And it's pretty rare that happens. We've done over 2,000 transactions, and I think it's like less than 1%. Has there been a post-transaction issue that needed to be addressed? So it's pretty rare. Pretty rare. Hi guys, it's still unclear if I buy the rights myself or if Royalty Exchange is the owner. Hopefully we answered that for you. Can I move the rights to the royalty rights out of Royalty Exchange? Do you mean as an admin, or do you mean something else? Because you can sell it off Royalty Exchange if you wanted to. Admin is required as part of our terms of use for the site. It's how we can effectively facilitate the market, so it's pretty important. So not really, but maybe, but let us know what you're thinking and we can look at it. I mean, the stance I like to take is nothing's a no until we have a conversation about it and see. So yeah, like let us know what you're thinking and we can talk about it. Regarding what you shared at the beginning of the call, does the MLC collect international mechanical royalties also or domestic only? How are international rights managed in terms of royalty collection and distribution? Who collects non-US mechanical royalties? I believe the MLC does do international, right? My focus has all been on the domestic. It's just domestic.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, the way that it typically works is that if it's a major publisher, a lot of times they will have international arms, but they'll also use what's called sub-publishers that are specifically their job is to go out into these territories. They're basically publishers in these other territories throughout the world, and it's their job to collect the royalties on behalf of the publisher and pay those through to the publisher.
We focus so much on the domestic that I didn't even take a look. Cool. All right, so this is the last submitted question here. What are your views, pros and cons on the current royalty streaming model versus a user-centric streaming model? Oh man, that's a loaded question. So I believe what you're referencing is the changes that some companies are making to how the royalty payouts work. I believe like Warner, I think it was, or maybe Universal was talking about how like they're paying a higher amount out to the larger streamed artists. So that's what the user-centric is. People listening to it more get a bigger cut. I think it's cause for concern for artists. It's making it very difficult for smaller artists to be successful and make a living doing their work. So I mean, that's kind of the cons of it for smaller artists. The pros are that, royalty payouts should be better geared towards organic listenership. Because I believe that this whole shift was in response to AI, if I'm remembering correctly. And bots just streaming crazy amounts, stuff like that. So I don't know. We'll see how it evolves. I think that there's a little bit to be concerned about as far as how it impacts artists, but it could be for the better too. It's kind of hard to gauge at this point since it's all kind of new. Just don't really know. What do you guys got thoughts?
I mean, offhand, I don't know which services have implemented a user-centric model, but I think that, and it's also impossible to say at this point, like what the effects are going to be. I would say the winners are people who are actually having their songs listened to and are now going to be benefiting from the direct payments for the bundled revenue that would have been allocated to other artists on the platform that weren't getting those plays just because of how stuff was getting split up on that pro rata basis. So probably, you could argue it's a more equitable model because the dollar is falling from the play directly to the artist instead of being split out to other parties that might not be getting those plays. And I think to John's point, like the winners of that are probably going to be the people who are, most being listened to, like the biggest artists on these platforms. I don't know if we can really speak to like how that's going to be playing out. Potential downside, I suppose, for more marginal artists that were getting a small benefit out of the pro rata model, where they were getting the upside of the revenue, but they weren't having the place to match up with it. But I'm not sure. We'll see. Those, the potential people who are hurt by this could be sort of the edge cases, and we're probably not getting too much in terms of royalty revenue from these services in the first place. The potential winners, you would expect that if they're getting the plays directly, it probably also fall pretty close to the share that we're getting paid out on a pro rata basis. So who's to say exactly? And probably the case that it's a small change for most users or for most artists, and for a handful it's significant, but probably not something that, as an investor, you may need to be worried about for the assets that you're taking a look at on the exchange.
Yeah, that's what I was about to get into. For royalty investing, it probably won't impact too much.
Yeah,
everything that we put up has to have a history of royalty earnings no matter what. So like we don't put anything up that would be in kind of that gray area. So yeah, it's probably not going to impact royalty investing. It's just for the artist's sake.
Yeah. I mean, you assume it would be the person who's getting a lot of plays from non-premium services that was getting a significant chunk of the prorated premium revenue payout would be the people who are impacted by that. But I can't think of, the type of artist or the type of music or catalog that would sort of fit into that kind of criteria. So, I think that these are just kind of, sort of outlier edge cases who would be really impacted by this, rather than, a specific slice of the market that we can identify, at least at this point.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
And then one more here. Do you think there should be free music on the DSPs? Do you mean free accounts, like ad-based accounts, or do you mean like royalty-free music? Because those are different accounts. I think so. I think it's only good for artists. It's more people listening, just because it's a different revenue model and maybe pays out a little bit less. I think it's important that artists get the exposure, they get the plays. I think that that's still important. It makes it accessible for people. It opens up the door to more premium members. It makes it accessible for emerging markets, which can be really important, and also for artists. So yeah, I think there should be free accounts. If people are willing to listen to ads for it, then so be it. Like why should that not be the case? Just my personal opinion, but that's what I think. You guys got thoughts?
I think that there's like some evidence that suggests that the customer lifetime value for free accounts is either commensurate or even higher than people who start out on a paid service, and that can vary by service. But yeah, that's up to it's the discretion of the business, right? But if they're looking at that and they're seeing there's a slice of the market that they can capture with their free accounts and generate plays like that, those can always be turned into subscribers later. But that's kind of that's sort of outside of the scope of like a royalty exchange, investing in these kind of assets question, right? Now you're getting into ideology and politics.
Yeah, and we, without the artists, there is no music, there is no royalties. So okay, and that's it for our submitted questions. Any last call for questions from you guys who are still here? Now is the time. I'm gonna start doing our kind of outro here. Thank you all for attending. Always appreciate the engagement and the questions. Yeah, Mark, you're welcome. If you ever want to have a larger call about it, let me know. Happy to do that too. Just to reiterate, I'm John Gessel. I'm our client relations coordinator here at Royalty Exchange. With me, as always, is Dayton O'Connor, our lead analyst, and then Rob Bernhardt, our corporate counsel. That's going to conclude this investor office hours. There will be a recording of this if you want to go back and take a visit, re-listen to what we talked about here. That will be available to you. And yeah, if you need anything else, got any questions, want to schedule a call, reach out to us, investors@royaltyexchange.com. And with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we will talk with you soon. All right. Thanks, everyone.